This is Tyler Mounce, and we are here for another episode of the Sea Life. I'm flying solo today. My co-pilot, Todd Vandehei, is not with us. He's still alive, but he's just not here today. But we're here with Casey Holliday, who is the co-founder of Qalo, which, if you haven't heard, is a awesome and innovative and somewhat disruptive product. And so, Casey, it's good to have you here.
I'm excited to be here, man. This is really cool.
And so for anyone who has not been into a CrossFit box, or most gyms probably around here now.
Sure, yeah.
Tell everyone what Qalo is, what you guys do.
Yeah, so we are a purpose-driven company that focuses really on the couple collectively, sort of in marriage. And so we're best known for being the creators of the functional wedding ring. So if you had heard about us, that's probably how you did. Is either you knew someone that was wearing a functional wedding ring and you said, what is that? What are you wearing? Why are you wearing it? Or you are actually yourself an adopter of it sort of in the early days. And we got our start really through CrossFit and really through sort of the firefighter communities. And so we really resonated with those audiences. And then since then we've grown to, over 1 million people wearing Qalo all around the world.
And so your flagship product is the silicone ring.
It is,
right?
Yes.
And so it's a wedding ring, or any ring, right, that you want to, that is durable, flexible.
Yeah, so basically our thought process is that it gives you the opportunity to wear a ring 24/7. You don't necessarily need to worry about taking it on and off based off of what you do from a hobbies perspective or an occupational perspective. So if, for instance, you're someone, which I was, that got married and had a metal ring, and then all of a sudden you go to the gym and you're either banging that metal ring up a ton or you find yourself taking it on and off constantly because of what you're doing. I was the guy that would go there. I would take it off. I'd put it in my gym bag. I'd go home. My wife would remind me 2 days later that I wasn't wearing a wedding ring, and I forgot where I put it. And then I'd search for about an hour, and then I'd find it. And so that problem just kind of kept repeating itself. And so we looked for a solution.
Yeah, it is pretty interesting. So, so everyone knows I'm a customer. We were talking about it. So
Yep.
I actually had a little bit
Thank you for that.
I had a little bit of I wasn't sure. I was like, do I wear because I'm the same as you. I've got a nice metal wedding ring.
Yep.
My wife bought it for me.
For
I was
sure.
personal training at the time. Within 2 months, it was thrashed.
Yeah,
totally destroyed.
right.
So I ended up now, getting the Qalo ring, wearing that most of the time. But I was trying to decide, I was like, if I wear the Qalo ring for the interview, like, will I seem like too much of a fanboy, or or it's like maybe I should wear wear the metal ring. But
Let's call it authenticity.
Yeah.
Let's call it like your
well,
true authentic member of the
in all
community.
honesty, I dislocated this finger a couple months ago.
Oh.
And actually can't fit my metal ring on anymore anyways. So I was like, well, I have to wear it anyways, which is another reason why obviously the silicone ring's awesome. So you hurt your fingers or whatever, because you hear about people getting
degloved. Yeah.
Yeah.
For some reason, our audience, which is like we appreciate it, but they think our customer service wants to see pictures of people sending in their degloved fingers. And so like once a week, pretty much, like our team will just be like, oh no, and they'll, we use Slack as like a messenger platform, and so they'll just like Slack a picture of like, hey, look, this customer lost their finger, and you'll see a metal ring that's just completely degloved a finger all the way up to the nail, and you immediately close the window, and you're like, why are you sending this out? But customers think that we want to see because that's the world we live in.
So anyways, but yeah, so I'm a customer. I'm a huge fan of the product, so it's fun for me to get to hear more about the origins. So take us back to the beginning, where it all started, or what you were doing prior to starting Qalo.
Yeah, so for me, I grew up in Orange County, so local here. I grew up in Dana Point, California, and I'm the third of 3 children, and both my parents were entrepreneurs. So my parents actually built a business in Amway in the early days.
Really?
Yeah. So back when multi-level was just crushing in the 80s and 90s. And I remember as a kid, I'd watch them sort of load up their whiteboard and laundry detergent in the back of our Astro van and drive out to all these spots. And like there was no digital stuff, right? So they would just be driving to people's houses, getting 20 people into that house and telling them about the Amway business. And so they kicked ass doing it. And so for me, it was always modeled kind of this element of this work ethic and sort of you get out what you put in. So it was interesting growing up and seeing how that's translated to myself today. So anyway, so I grew up here in Orange County, went to Mission Viejo High School, and then I went to Texas Christian University for 2 years. So I first went there.
And it was 2 years because you finished so fast?
Oh, yeah, because I just flew through. No, it was 2 years because I just didn't necessarily think it was right for me. And really, I came to a spot where my parents came to me and said, hey, look, I was the third of 3 kids. They'd made a lot of money sort of throughout Amway, but It was in, I mean, I was in college I graduated from high school in 2006. So I was in college 2007, 2008, right? So right when financially, a lot of people were dealing with a lot of stuff and a lot of the sure things weren't sure things anymore financially. And so my parents had come to me and said, hey, after 2 years, basically, like, hey, we can't really afford to continue to send you to college, sort of in the same way that we had previous, where they were covering all of it, which I was super grateful for.
Yeah, and it's private university
Private
too.
university, like it's definitely not cheap. And so they came to me and said, hey, look, you can continue going to this school. We'll do everything we can to help you financially. Like it was, I mean, I got it. I understood the position that they were in, and they were very, fortunately, transparent with me about it. Doesn't mean I wasn't frustrated. I was 20 years old, but I looked at what I was doing, and I had initially gone to college to be a broadcast journalism major. So it was like I wanted to be on SportsCenter, right? I wanted to be like a sports anchor. After about less than a semester of being in a communications class, I was like, this is not for me. So kinesiology was actually the major that I went into after that, where it's like I loved working out, and I loved physiology, and I loved everything sort of learning about the human body and anatomy and everything that came along with that. And so I was like, great, I'm going to be an anatomy and physiology major. So switched over to kinesiology, and I became that major, and I started taking these classes. And at TCU, the curriculum's different, where you actually take like senior level courses as a freshman, and they build out like a holistic curriculum over the 4 years. So it's not like, oh, I got my GED in the first 2 years, and then you sort of go into your major. Like you're kind of operating within your major the whole time that you're there. So anyway, after 2 years I'm in it, I didn't really want to go into physical therapy. My parents were like, hey, we can't afford to continue to send you. For me, it was like, am I really going to personal train my way out of $100,000 of debt? And I just didn't necessarily see a pathway for that happening for myself. I just didn't know if I necessarily loved it enough to do that. So after 2 years, I made the decision to actually drop out of college, and I moved back home to live with my parents. And I decided I was going to go to firefighting school. So I figured, hey, all the skill sets that I have, I was an athlete in high school. I enjoy working out. I think firefighting is sort of a good transitional place for me to go, sort of after college, where you don't really need a college degree, but you can go to a year of fire tech school. So that's what I decided to do. So I enrolled in a fire tech school at Santa Ana College, lived at home, and again, similar kind of story where after a semester I ended up dropping out of firefighting school. And for me, it was a place where I started learning, I think, what level of passion was required to be successful in something that competition existed in. So I remember sitting in class, and I always found it really interesting, but I remember sitting in class, and the guy next to me had wanted to be a firefighter like since he was 2, right? Like he was the kid that was in the fire chief outfit as a 2-year-old walking around the house pushing a fire truck, and that just wasn't me. And so I realized that if it comes down to me and this guy, like he's going to win, and it's not because I think he's more capable or more talented than me, but it's because he cares more than I do about this. And so I was like, I think I should step away from this, and I kind of stepped out of firefighting school. So kind of another failure in a way, but I guess if you can find a silver lining in it, it was for me understanding the amount of passion required in order to pursue something.
So it wasn't that, so both with college and firefighting, it wasn't that you didn't shy away from the hard work. It was more just that you recognized you didn't have the passion to carry you along in pursuing it.
For sure. And I think for me, like I grew up fortunate. I grew up very fortunately. My parents, provided very well for us. My parents was a great mother, great father. I had awesome siblings. So I came up and I was raised in a really good home life. But I think for me, everything kind of came easy. And I think high school kind of came easy for me. And I wasn't the greatest athlete, but I was, I could get by, and I could be on the teams, and I could go to college, and it was like I could kind of get by. But then once you get to college and you start sort of getting beyond college and things start getting a little bit more competitive, you realize, you can't really just kind of skate by and things don't really come as easy to you. And so for me, it was, I'm willing to work my ass off. That's not the question here, but I want to be able to work my ass off in something that I'm really excited about and passionate about. And so for me, kind of that fail fast mentality where it's like, let's go 100 miles an hour into something and then learn as soon as I possibly can whether or not I love it or whether or not I want to step away from it. And so for college, there was more variables outside of college that kind of led me to that realization. But I think firefighting school really was that, which was, hey, I don't necessarily love this as much as the next guy, and I don't really want to put the work in. So it's not that I was scared of the work. It was like, do I really want to put this work in to have sort of this outcome be the result of all of that hard work? And in firefighting, I realized it wasn't what I wanted.
So you're at what, like 20, 21
Yeah,
at
about
this
20.
point?
Yeah,
Okay.
20.
So you have dropped out of college, you dropped out of firefighting school.
Yeah.
And what was next on the
next
agenda?
was the real sure thing. I decided I want to be an actor in LA, right? So so my parents are like, great. Okay, cool. So you've dropped out of college, but at least that safety net is that acting career in LA, right? Which when you talk about competition,
gosh.
right? Like that's just the most competitive.
More actors than there are firefighters.
Exactly.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure, right? So for me it was like, hey, I'm going to move to LA. So I picked up my things. And I've always been a guy that's like, I probably should do more research prior to doing things or more preparation or think through things more. But it was like, look, I'm going to go. Because the worst thing that happens is I end up back at my parents' house as a college and firefighter school dropout,
Which
right?
is all the rage right now.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
it totally is. Kind of blazed that path, right?
Yeah.
So I moved to LA and I decided I wanted to be an actor and started pursuing acting. And
had you ever acted?
I acted when I was a kid. So acting was something that I always really enjoyed doing. But when I was like 13, it's either like, hey, you need to go into like travel sports and have that be really intense, or you need to like actually try and start acting and make that kind of your pathway.
And you went the sports route.
Yeah, which is crazy that we put that on a 13-year-old, but that's just sort of life nowadays.
Yeah.
And so I decided, like, my brother had played sports and my sister was playing sports, and so we were kind of that family. And so it was like, yeah, I'll sort of go into sports. I love that, but turns out when I was 18, I was 5'7", 130 pounds, which isn't exactly the frame
for the NFL.
Yeah, the foundation you want to build a professional sports career on.
So then you moved to LA?
So I moved to LA.
Okay.
Yeah, picked up and moved to LA.
And are you doing the whole like studio apartment?
Oh my dude, I subleased a place, a 3-bedroom place, and I moved in. I think it was like $450 a month, which I was like scraping by trying to afford. And
you subleased a room out of that.
Out of that. Yeah. So I was the third roommate in the 3-bedroom place, right? Their buddy had just moved out. These two guys that live from the Midwest. One of them, huge stoner. The other one was a professional pickup artist, right? So I mean, it was
what?
Yeah. I mean, for another podcast, but it was like the most LA things ever, right? Like you got the stoner that's watching cartoons, and you have the professional pickup artist, and then like the wannabe actor, right? So that's just like every 3-bedroom apartment in LA are those 3 people. So and then so I was working at P.F. Chang's. I was waiting tables at P.F. Chang's, the Sherman Oaks Galleria.
With all your other acting cronies.
Oh my gosh, everybody. Yeah, everybody there was a wannabe something else, right? And that's just kind of what in LA what it is, where you say, what do you do? You're an actor, and it's like, cool, what restaurant do you work at? That's kind of the, you know. And so for me, I worked at P.F. Chang's. I was, I was kind of the new guy, so I would work lunch shifts. I'd make like $11 on a lunch shift in tips. So you'd get like 3 or 4 tables coming in, you're making $7 an hour. And so I was probably clearing, $1,100 a month, making it. So but my $450, like I was living like a king with the extra $700 I had, right, to pay for things. I ended up with like fleas in that apartment, so I was lonely. This is a sidebar, but I was lonely as heck, so I decided I was going to go get like a gerbil or something. I ended up leaving with a cat. I'd never had a cat before in my life. So I bring this cat into this apartment. Turns out my roommate's dog had fleas, gave it to my cat, and I don't know if you've ever, hopefully you've never had flea infestation in your place, but it was like I would stand at my sink and brush my teeth, and I would have fleas up to my knees from my carpet.
Oh my God.
Like they just cover carpet. Like I would lay in bed at night, and I would feel the fleas on my face hopping around. No joke. So it was just crazy, but I just kind of took it in stride, and I think there's kind of this like struggling actor mentality where you're like, hey, one day when I'm receiving an Oscar, I'll tell people about, the flea story. But yeah, obviously I'm on this podcast for completely different reasons.
Yeah, gotta love your optimism.
Right, yeah, exactly. If anything else, I was optimistic. I didn't exactly have a resume that was that impressive, so it's not like I had an ego going into it, But anyway, so pursued acting. My mom was going through a difficult time herself, and she loved acting previously. So I was like, hey, Mom, I'm up in L.A. She was still down in Orange County. I was like, why don't you drive up once a week and take an acting class with me? And so the two of us took an acting class together in L.A. Super fun. On our first day, we went there, and you get like a scene partner. That's how the class worked. You would get like a scene partner. And her first scene was with a guy by the name of Ted Baker, who is now the co-founder of Qalo with me. So
your mom did.
My mom did a scene with Ted. Yeah. On the first day.
So your partner at Qalo was also an aspiring actor.
He was also an aspiring. He wasn't necessarily aspiring. He was actually a pretty successful actor.
Really?
So his resume of life is way more impressive than mine ever was. And he was actually a successful actor. He was in like World Cup commercials. He's been on NCIS and Bones. Like he was actually doing really well for himself. So when we get to the story about how he sacrificed a lot more than I did, that's true. I mean, the guy had a lot more successful of a career than I ever did. But he was taking this acting class, and the acting classes in LA go where it's like you have working actors that are really successful with somebody whose first acting class it is. That's just kind of the way it works. And so my mom did a scene with Ted, and Ted has a story of going through a difficult situation with his mother passing away when he was young. And so him and my mom really kind of bonded and hit it off. And now my mom's kind of like his mom as well. It's kind of been a cool story.
So your mom was sort of like a matchmaker.
She totally was. Yeah, exactly. For a business. Yeah. And so Ted managed a restaurant in Beverly Hills. So he was a part owner and managed a restaurant in Beverly Hills. And I was working at P.F. Chang's. And so we'd built a friendship. And after time, I went to him and said, hey, why don't, can I come sort of work at the restaurant? And so he got me a job actually working in this restaurant in Beverly Hills. And so Ted and myself worked at a restaurant together in Beverly Hills. That's how we really kind of built a friendship and a working relationship separate from where Qalo is today.
But you obviously, you left acting. So what happened?
So similar to, hey, I want to go 100% and then I want to bail as quickly as I can if I realize it's not for me. So acting, I realized, is a lot of relying on others. And for me, I'd always had that kind of like self-starter mentality where I was like, am I really going to sit on a couch and wait for other people to try and cast me in their things? So I said, screw it. I'm going to save up a bunch of money myself. I'm going to write a movie. I'm going to produce a movie. I'm going to cast a movie. I'm going to cast all my buddies in a movie. And we're going to go shoot a movie and just create a movie ourselves. And I'll put myself in it. So I'll be able to act. I'll be able to produce. I'll be able to figure out what it's like to sort of fund a movie. And we went and shot a 30-minute movie, which is like not the right length. I didn't really know a ton about what I was doing, but it was like, hey, I want to be able to actually create something that can lend itself to giving myself an opportunity to actually grow my acting career. And so I raised money and went through the whole process and started my own production company and like went for it. And in that movie, we were casting the lead actress in it. So we went through the casting process. I cast a girl by the name of Bryony Humphreys in it. And we shot it, and about 2 months went by of shooting it. I built a relationship with her, and then 8 months later, she was my wife. So we ended up getting married. Yeah. So
wow.
Yeah. So it's funny. So I randomly I decided I was going to produce this movie. I randomly cast her in this movie. Didn't know her at all. She's Australian. She went to a performing arts school in LA. She was out there. Randomly auditioned. I actually didn't even really like her at first. I thought she had a bad attitude, which is funny, right? So I was just like, I guess we'll put up with her throughout the filming process. Wrapped filming, and then we just kind of like kept in contact and hung out a couple times, and then. We just decided to sort of like, it was like, hey, I know I want to do this. She was on a student visa over here, so her visa was running out, and she's from Perth, Australia, so it was either like, hey, we can do long distance, like 17 hours away, which is like, I'm a betting man, and I don't think that would really work out regardless of how much I cared about you. So it was like, look, I know I want to marry you. First time I ever talked to her dad was when I asked him if I could marry her over FaceTime.
Oh my gosh.
6 months later. So proposed about 6 months after we got done shooting the movie. And then 8 months later, we were married. So we only had about a 2-month engagement because of her visa process. It's all legit, I promise. At least I know. I don't think she's backdooring anything to me. But we have a kid together, so I guess that solidifies it. But so got married. And then it's funny that like the reason my history with my wife is relevant to this is like is what led me to wearing a wedding ring, and that's what's ultimately led me to starting Qalo, to realize like, hey, I've been married 3 months. Wearing a wedding ring is a huge pain in the butt. I was 24 when I got married, so I was a younger dude. And then Ted, who again is the co-founder of Qalo with me, married his wife a couple months after I married mine. So like crazy kind of like outliers time frame of everything, but he got married.
You're talking about outliers like Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah, like Malcolm Gladwell's outliers. When you look at all of those people worked hard, right? So it's like, let's check that box and assume that everyone in outliers had to work really hard in order to be successful because there's no shortcuts. But like the timing of everything, and when you look at, for lack of a better term, stars aligning, like it was a really interesting sequence of events that kind of led us to starting Qalo. When you look at like randomly, I decided to take an acting class with my mom. Randomly, her first scenes with Ted. Ted owns this restaurant. I'm working in a restaurant. I want a better gig. I randomly decide to produce a movie, cast my wife in it. I get married, and that leads me to wearing a wedding ring. And then Ted, working in this restaurant, met his wife, who worked next door, and then ended up getting married 2 months after me. And so in passing one day at work, we were just two newlywed guys that were talking about wearing a wedding ring and what a pain in the butt it was. And that's kind of where the foundation of Qalo started.
Great. So was that, sorry, going back to Malcolm Gladwell's book, is that a book you read after all this happened?
Yeah.
Okay. So that kind of shed light on what you had saw as just fortune and luck at the time.
Yeah. And I think like if you're an entrepreneur and you're in it, you don't often give yourself a 30,000 foot view of like being able to take that in, right? And to look at it and be like, well, let me look at the sequence of events and see really how it led me to where I am today. Where now I think, 5.5, 6 years into the business, like I have the ability to look back and go, what ultimately led me here? Like what got me here? And even in reading Outliers, it was and as an entrepreneur, I think I read it in like the first 2 years of the business where it's like we were still really small. We didn't have any employees. We were still kind of figuring it out. And you hope to be a story in the Outliers book, right? You know what I mean? So it's that's so you're reading it and you're like, yeah, maybe one day like I'll be able to look back and go, wow, we were kind of an Outliers story. And now 5 years later, I'm fortunate enough to be in a position where I look back and go, yeah, that did feel sort of like one of those stories.
Okay, so you're married. You and your coworker Ted hate wearing wedding rings.
Yep.
How does the conversation about wedding rings go to starting a business?
Go to starting a company.
And like as you mentioned, him giving up what was actually going well for him.
For sure.
You were looking for something else, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. For me, so I was waiting tables and bartending. I was fortunately living in a better place than I had when I first started in LA, but still, like I was looking for something else. And
was your wife doing well with acting?
She was in a similar boat sort of that I was, where I think for her it was kind of the beginning of the end for her of like, hey, I really enjoy this, but the acting industry is, you have to look at it, and the same as anything else, I'm not sure if there's a greater sacrifice beyond maybe like military and people that live their lives in that world, a bigger sacrifice required to be successful. Like you literally have to look yourself in the mirror and be like, I'm okay with being single, living in a studio apartment when I'm 60 for the sake of trying to be a professional actor. Like it's that volatile, it's that difficult. And so like hats off to everyone that's trying it and that's willing to make that sacrifice. And not everybody ends up in that place, but you have to almost be okay with potentially ending up in that place because it's honestly like acting is like the longest internship ever with no guarantee of ever getting a job. Like that's like how I would describe it to people. And so it's like, you better be okay like getting coffee for the next 50 years with the hopes that one day you'll have somebody that's getting coffee ultimately for you, but there's zero guarantee of that. Where it's like when you start in a company at like a coordinator level employee that's just kind of like getting started, like there's potential upside there, and if you work hard enough, like hopefully there's sort of light at the end of that tunnel. Where in acting, that light of that tunnel doesn't really exist, and you really just have to kind of go out and create it for yourself.
Crazy. So now you and your wife are starting to think. And so prior to the conversation with Ted, had you had conversations about, hey, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do next?
Yeah, I think for me it was, this is kind of a pain in the butt, but it wasn't in terms of a wedding ring. Like, hey, this is kind of a pain, but it wasn't. I don't think I was necessarily solutions oriented. I think I was still, hey, I'm going to work for 8 hours a day. I'm bartending and/or being a waiter. Yes, there are skills that are being developed, but like what long-term skills am I learning that I can kind of build a foundation on to one day sort of get out of this profession? And so the way I saw it, and I'm sure a lot of people in LA do see it, is like I go wait tables and that's what I do in order to live. But what my passion is and what I ultimately want to do is what I do when I'm not waiting tables. But I mean, if you think about it in the scheme of life, I mean, you're working 9-10 hours a day in a restaurant. You get home, you're maybe spending 2 to 3 hours on something that you're ultimately really passionate about. That's not necessarily a recipe for success. And so I knew that, hey, I want to be able to try and build something myself. So I know that like what I'm working on today will benefit me tomorrow, as opposed to what I'm working on today will be the exact same thing I'm working on tomorrow. Does that make sense? And that's kind of what going to a restaurant feels like, where it's like each day is kind of the same. The only variable is the people that are coming into the restaurant. Your everyday kind of looks similar. And for me, that's kind of why I started a production company. And that's why I was working with another production company on the side to try and learn about that, because I wanted to start my own thing to try and build something greater, or at least feel like I was building a foundation for something greater. And I was looking to what you say. Like I was looking for something to really sink my teeth into. And not to jump too far ahead, but like the reason I started Qalo, and my only goal in starting Qalo was to not wait tables anymore. That was it. Right? So it's like my view, and everybody has different viewpoints on what success looks like. For me, it was, I want to be able to quit my restaurant job. I don't care if I'm making $1,500 a month, $2,000 a month, whatever it is. I just want to be able to make what I'm making currently doing something else that I felt like would be provide more long-term value for myself and my now wife as well. Like getting married, as you know, like I was like, oh, you're getting married, like cool, nothing will change. And then you wake up the first day after you get married and you're like, wow, like someone literally just emotionally connected, but also signed on a piece of paper that I would be their partner in life forever. And my viewpoint is that I think as a husband in a relationship that there's certain things that you should provide for your wife. So now all of a sudden, holy cow, I'm called into accountability from a wife. I now have responsibilities that I didn't have previous. And I really better get my shit together, right?
Yeah.
In order to move forward. And so that was eye-opening for me as well. So I was definitely looking for something to really sink my teeth into. But in terms of the wedding ring, it wasn't, hey, there's a solution out there. What should I do? It wasn't until Ted actually came to me. I had been just taking my ring on and off. It wasn't until Ted came to me and in passing said, hey, are you wearing a ring? And I was like, no, I'm taking mine on and off. Obviously my wife wants me to wear one and I want to wear one because I'm stoked to be married and what the ring represents. Like I'm all about that. And he was like, I'm just not wearing one because it just doesn't make sense for me, right? Like if I'm just going to take something on and off constantly, like it makes no sense. And he said, there has to be something out there that makes more sense. Right, so he was the one that kind of lit the fire of a solutions-oriented product to try and solve for this problem that we were all facing. Where for me, I think my head was maybe up in the clouds in terms of looking for another opportunity. But when he said that, it clicked for me, and it was, oh, dude, like, what if we actually could create that solution? And so, at first, again, to what he gave up, like that dude was successful. He made a lot more money than I did, and so for him, I think if it was him doing it by himself, he wouldn't have. I think it would have been like, look, I'm maybe like, yeah, that sounds like a cool opportunity to pursue, silicone wedding rings. But, Casey, with you sort of helping me to drive this forward, I think that I'm willing to do it. And so he kind of looked at me and said, look, if you do this with me, I'll do it with you. And so that was kind of our marriage in a way in terms of being business partners. And I said, I'm down, man. Let's go for it. And so from there, that was kind of the starting point. And Ted had done some businesses previously, but I don't think either one of us had really started an e-commerce company and really, figured out manufacturing and the finances and everything associated with starting a business. But we decided, similar to kind of a lot of other things in my life, I was like, let's dive in. Like, let's go for it.
So what did developing the first prototype look like? Did you, or like when you said, hey, let's do this, you had come up with the idea we could create some sort of rubber silicone? That was the concept in the beginning?
Yeah. So it was and look, I wish I could tell you we did like all kinds of market research and we looked at all these different materials. No, dude, we didn't really have any idea what we were doing, right? So, but we were two guys that were kind of shooting from the hip, which I think is, it's part of the MVP process, right? Of rolling out the minimal viable product and just getting out there to people. And so for us, it was, hey, what material are we familiar with that's already maybe worn that we think could stand up to sort of the lifestyle that we're talking about? Living that this ring would make sense with, and kind of silicone is what came to us. And so Ted had a friend who had a manufacturer that happened to be in Beverly Hills at that time.
A manufacturing plant in Beverly Hills?
He was a manufacturer from overseas that was meeting with her about her company, and she made a product for handbags, right? So Ted reached out to her, and Ted's like the ultimate networker. That guy's got more, like he has more relationships and cares more about more people than I even know someone is capable of caring about, which is like his best quality. I'm not great at that, but he has relationships with all kinds of people. And so he's like, oh, let me reach out to my friend. She's like, yeah, my manufacturer actually happens to be in town. Do you guys want to come talk to him? So we went to the Beverly Hilton Hotel or I forget what it's, like the fanciest hotel ever. Like I did not belong in there. Like I had long hair down to my shoulders. Like I couldn't have been more fish out of water. But anyway, we sat down with this guy and we said, hey, look, here's our idea. We took our metal rings off, and we had gone and bought more metal rings at like Marshall's, and we sat down with him, and we were like, hey, this is what we want to make. Can you make it out of silicone? And the guy was like, yeah, sure, I think I can give it a shot. And, we funded the company. So we took $0 to fund the company. It was mine and Ted's savings accounts, which being a newlywed, telling your wife you're starting a company, maybe leaving your job, and then empty your savings account is like the worst recipe for a successful marriage. But that's what we decided to do anyway. And so we were just like, hey, what's it going to cost to get a mold made? Like, what could we do? And we took like the cheapest route possible. And the guy was like, yeah, sure, I can make them for you. So he left, and Ted worked directly with him. And about 6 weeks later, we had a prototype of a silicone ring in our hands in Los Angeles. And it was awful. It was a horrible product, but it at least was a silicone ring that provided the functionality that we were looking for to start a company. So it checked that box.
What was so bad about it?
So a lot of the quality of goods that are made from a silicone process deals with like making sure that you have proper molds that can actually eliminate flashing on a product. So flashing being like the excess silicone that comes off, right? So we received the rings, and it was made in a waffle iron. Like, then you make a waffle and everything comes out the side. Like, that's probably what these molds looked like. And so we would get a ring, and honestly, 100% of the rings we got were unusable.
Really?
Like, they were just...
How big was that first run?
So I think that we...
Because he would have given you some sort of a minimum in order to do it?
Yeah, some sort of a minimum. The first order that we did the prototyping process, and then the first order that we received was 50,000 rings.
50,000 rings.
And dude, so it was
variety of sizes.
Variety of size. Well, we did small, medium, large initially.
Okay.
We had no idea that nobody in the world knows their ring size, so that was a learning curve.
Okay.
And so we did small, medium, and large. It was kind of a combination of a few different ring sizes, and we did 3 different colors, and that was all of our savings. So it was like, it wasn't cheap. I mean, it was like small runs. I mean, it was like we were barely hitting minimums. We had to pay for the molding itself, the tooling, and it was like 50,000 units. It was like this guy's minimum order. So I remember Ted and I like scraping to try and be able to place this order. But that meant that when we were building our Shopify website, like we were arguing over whether or not we could afford $100 theme. You know what I mean? To put it on. You know what I mean? It put us in that position. But we were like, look, we got to get rings. This guy's minimum order is X. Like, all right, we got to figure it out. And I remember standing in his garage, because that's where all of the rings went, looking at him and being like, dude, we're never going to sell all of these. And it wasn't because I didn't believe my business. It was like 50,000 rings. Like, no chance in hell we're going to move all of these. But if we do, like, we're retiring, right? Like we are just going to be loaded out of our heads if we are able to sell all of these rings. And I remember our wives, like Ted always tells the story, his wife was like, there's no chance you guys are going to sell all of those, right? Like it's Casey's father-in-law that's placing the first orders, right? Like unless he's interested in a 50,000 initial order, right? Like it's going to be tough to sell all of them, but it didn't stop us.
So where did you sell your first rings? So you mentioned Shopify.
Yep. Yeah. So we went on Shopify, which is like, and again, going back to kind of that outlet mentality, like if templated like e-commerce sites like didn't exist, which they didn't exist like a decade ago, probably, like Ted and I had no clue how to run an e-commerce website. I knew nothing about coding. I knew nothing about back-end development. I knew nothing about it. Where it was like, my brother fortunately was in marketing at the time and was like, hey, check out Shopify. It's basically like a one-size-fits-all. You can go on there and change the theme to color to be navy, and you can have a website that's different from someone else's, right? So I learned as much as I possibly could, learned about Shopify, and decided to purchase a theme for $100, really splurged. Bought a theme for $100, and then I started teaching myself everything I possibly could about the back end of Shopify while Ted handled manufacturing and the banking side of stuff, and just went out and just sat at his dining room table and tried to build a website. And we built a terrible website, but it was able to sell rings, and that's the most important thing. Like entrepreneurs, just analysis paralysis, get so obsessed with things looking perfect. And for us, it was like, we just want to be able to determine whether or not like this is a viable market, like proof of concept.
Yeah.
Like, let's just make sure somebody can buy a ring. The rest we can kind of figure out
wedding rings
later.
have been around forever.
Exactly.
And when was the last time someone innovated the men's wedding ring?
Exactly. And fortunately, we were able to say, hey, this is a functional wedding ring or a silicone wedding ring that like the wedding ring part people are already familiar with.
Yeah.
So what we were doing, we were evolving a market that already existed. We weren't necessarily creating an entirely new product category that had never existed before. And this is what I tell people in product development all the time is like, oftentimes you really just need to tweak one or two things, and you can actually completely recreate a product that had been around for thousands of years.
Huh. So, but how do people find the rings on Shopify? Like, obviously, you have to have some outbound marketing.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Like,
oh, and the other thing too, you mentioned that you had early adoption with CrossFit and firefighters, but you and Ted were neither of those things. Mm-hmm. Like, how did that happen? Yeah.
So for us, it ultimately was about shameless outreach initially, and you have to be. And I tell people this all the time because entrepreneurs go to conferences and read books looking for the easiest way to do things. There isn't one. Like you honestly just have to bust your ass. That's your only option. If you're not willing to do it, go do something else or go work for someone else, right? Like, and so there's no replacement for work ethic. In the initial days, it was how do we tell as many people as we possibly can about our product to determine. And it wasn't even like to sell product. Yes, that was part of it, but it was like to determine if this is even real. Like, are there people besides Ted and myself that even want to wear a silicone wedding ring? Again, fail fast, like proof of concept. Let's learn as quickly as we can whether or not like this product category is even real. And then we can really focus on, customer creation and really sort of driving revenue and moving things forward. So for us, it was how do we get as many of those 50,000 rings we initially got on people's hands? And we believe that as a result of sort of the viral nature of the product, that it will then lead to other sales. And so ultimately our goal is to create customers by telling people about the product and actually sending them the product for free, separate from, let's do paid advertising, because we didn't have the money to do that. We didn't have the money to do that. And so if you're in the process as an entrepreneur trying to learn about the feasibility of your product and whether or not it's actually a proof of concept, if the product's real, like, yes, spend some money, but don't just blow all of your money through advertising. Like, actually get it on people's fingers, or get it on someone's back, or get it in whatever the product is. And so for us, it was complete shameless outreach. That was when it was really in the early days, even before like Facebook and Instagram was even a big thing. So Instagram didn't really exist. It wasn't so it was bloggers. So it's like top 10 fitness blogs. Okay, great. Who's the writer? Okay, great. Is there an email address on their blog? Awesome. I'm going to email them and ask them if they want a Qalo. Worst thing that happens, they don't respond. Well, dude, they weren't talking to me before I sent the email anyway, so who cares, right? Like, so I'm in the same boat I was in before. So it was, let's find the top, and we knew because we knew why we needed to wear the product. And so it was like, it wasn't that we were completely like throwing a dart against the wall to try and figure out like who the community should be. We knew, hey, working out wise, it's a pain to wear a metal ring. Like, hey, we learned through communicating with people like firefighters of, hey, when I get to the station, if I'm a firefighter, I take my ring off 3 days later when I leave, or 2 days later when I leave, whatever my shift is, I put my ring back on and then go back home. Where when you look at the firefighter community, the divorce rate's way higher than the national average. People are going there.
Really?
Oh, it's astronomical. Like, people are going there basically risking their lives, and they don't have their wedding ring on, which is like the most meaningful commitment they've ever made in their life, which is the reason they're doing what they're doing. They don't actually get to wear it while they're out there risking their lives. Like, the disconnect there, that's crazy. And so it was like, hey, could Qalo give actually that firefighter the opportunity to wear a ring all the time on the job? So it's like when he's about to run into a burning building or dealing with like someone's loved one that's going through a tough time, like they have that reminder as to why they're doing what they're doing to help sort of fulfill their purpose deeper. And that's kind of what Qalo initially was. So it was, okay, there's these communities. Then it went to bloggers, right? Okay, fitness, firefighters, military. Like, what are some use cases for the product initially? And I think it's important when you're starting a company to not try and be everything to everyone, where you say, like, who is the target demo that we're trying to go after? And CrossFit, for us, was one of those initial communities where we like, look, people, I wasn't a CrossFitter. I didn't do CrossFit. Ted's not a CrossFitter. So you're right, we weren't any of these things. But we had the ability to recognize communities that probably would have a need for Qalo. And so it was, great, let's reach out to them as quickly as we can. If we get 10 no's, everybody tells us it's dumb, maybe that community isn't one that resonates well with Qalo. So that's kind of what we did, and it was just complete shameless outreach. And it was emailing. It was not DMing through Instagram, although that's a way that people utilize now. It wasn't. Some of it was Facebook messages, but it was really just emailing bloggers, and then us sending them product.
So of those first 50,000 rings, how many did you give away?
Thousands. Yeah.
And did people eventually start buying them?
People eventually, fortunately, people eventually did start buying them. Yeah.
So you would give them to a blogger. She may write about it. That would have a link back to your Shopify site, and you would
or just tell people about the name of the company. And because we were the original, right? Like, there wasn't anybody else out there that was like, oh, if I search silicone ring on Google, I'm not going to go find another company because we started the category, right? So then people could find Qalo super easy in the early days, and so it was just like getting our name out there. People misspelling it, whatever. We didn't care. It was just like, just tell people, as many people as possible, about our product. And there were two key moments in the early days that were a positive response to sort of that shameless outreach, because it can be really like difficult when you're emailing 20 people a day and getting one response, right? Like that can be a difficult thing. It can take the wind out of your sails, and that's part of the sort of difficulty of the initial journey of entrepreneurship, is obviously hearing a bunch of no's or people telling us we were dumb, our product was terrible, why would anybody wear it? Like, we heard it all, and we still hear it. But initially, we reached out to a woman who ran a blog. Her name was Lori, and her and her husband ran a blog called Firefighter Wife. And basically, it was a forum that provided a safe place for the wives of firefighters. So it's mainly a male-dominant profession. And so the women who were often at home with the kids or maybe had a job themselves and were trying to balance being a mother as well as being married to a firefighter, like that's kind of a journey in itself. And so it was a forum that gave them a safe place to come voice opinions or at least feel supported by other women that were kind of living the same life that they were. So we reached out to her and said, hey, we love what you represent, what your community represents. And obviously, like, you're a viral community in firefighting, like we want to be able to send rings out for your husband to be able to wear on the job to kind of coincide with what you're doing from a forum perspective. And she was like, great. So she said he'll give it a shot. She posted about it in like 10 minutes on Facebook. She had like 50 comments from wives of firefighters like, oh my gosh, I love this. This is so cool. So that was kind of a proof of concept moment where it's like you never really know who you're reaching out to or where sort of a spark will ignite your business. So that was one. And then the other one, which is a really cool story to tell, which is, I would say, probably the key spark that ignited a lot of Qalo was, as an entrepreneur, I think oftentimes, whether you like, I obviously grew up in Orange County, whether you live in Minnesota, whether you live in wherever you may be, that you feel like, hey, I don't quite have the same opportunity that someone else does, right? Like that's something that I hear quite a bit from entrepreneurs. And some of that may be true, sure. But I would actually challenge the entrepreneur back and say, like, dig deeper into that Rolodex and find someone that you may have a second degree, third degree relationship with that could actually help grow your business. Or go back and look at your life experiences and go, maybe I went to this college and, hey, maybe I could create a connection with someone that also went to that college that maybe I don't know. But like that Rolodex, I think everyone's Rolodex, and that's a dated term. So, I mean, I'm not that old, but maybe I'm aging myself a little bit, right? Like, but basically where you would keep everyone's information that you've come in contact with over time, like it's bigger than you think. And I would actually challenge yourself as an entrepreneur to go back in and like find a common thread that exists with people that you may not believe you have a common thread with that can maybe actually help jumpstart your business. And so for me, I went to Texas Christian University. Granted, I was there for 2 years, but Andy Dalton, who's the quarterback for the Cincinnati Bengals, also went to TCU. So turns out he was actually marrying a girl that I was friends with from TCU. And so, like, I was completely shameless in these days, right? Like, you have to be, like, who cares what people think of you? If nobody's wearing your product, it doesn't matter anyway, right? Like, so I reached out to her, sent her a Facebook message, and said, hey, I know that you and Andy just got married. I just started this company. Maybe Andy would want to wear the product. Like, this is a lame analogy, but it was a Hail Mary, right? Like, it was a Hail Mary, right?
Yeah.
Like, this was me going, like, who cares what she responds? 3 months go by, she doesn't even answer me. Whatever, dude. Whatever, same boat. Finally, she answers and is like, hey, Andy, finally looked at your site, thinks it's cool. Why don't you send some out? We were like, I played it cool, right? I'm like, all right, cool, I'll get them out. But I was like, dancing around my living room, right? Like, but so I sent them out to him. She responds, a month later, was like, hey, we got them. Cool, thanks. He thinks they're cool. I was like, all right, awesome. Well, turns out that the Cincinnati Bengals were on Hard Knocks, which is an HBO show that follows the preseason football, right? So it's like a documentary style show on HBO. Turns out the Cincinnati Bengals were the team that were being featured that year. So I had moved in with my mom for a time. For when we moved Qalo from LA to Orange County, my wife and I moved in with my mom to help build a business. And so we didn't have HBO, didn't have anything. And I get the first episode airs, and I get a text from a good buddy of mine who helped Qalo in the early days, by the name of Jordan Palmer, who was in the NFL for a while. And he was like, dude, what did you do to have them do that on HBO? And I was like, no idea what you're talking about, man. Like, what? He's like, they literally just did a 5-minute segment on Qalo on the first episode of Hard Knocks.
No way, just legitimate
Completely
earned
organic.
PR.
Completely organic. Like, we had no money. We couldn't have paid anybody to do that. HBO doesn't probably really do that. Product placement on an athlete. Like, that's not really what they do. But Andy, what the show actually was doing was making fun of him for wearing it. So Andy, like, the show, like, I think it's about midway through the episode, and it's like, while Andy Dalton searches for his first Super Bowl ring, like, this ring will have to do until then, or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
And it slow pans down to his hand on his helmet, and he's wearing a black Qalo. And then it goes to his interview, and it's like, again, we couldn't have scripted it up any better. And Andy's like the best guy. He's just so pure Qalo in terms of an ambassador standpoint. And he's just like, yeah, I think it's cool. Like, I'm excited to be married, and I love representing my marriage to my wife, and I love that I can wear the ring out on the field. Like, you know what I mean? Checked if we couldn't have scripted it any better. And then the rest of the episode is Jay Gruden, who's the coach, like making fun of him for wearing it. And the other players making fun of him for wearing it. Like, look at this guy, can't take his wedding ring off for 5 minutes on the field, right? Like, just completely just making fun of him. And
meanwhile, women who want their husbands to wear rings are eating it up.
Well, meanwhile, yeah, but like, it's like, I would actually argue and be like, the guy that's making fun of him for wearing it isn't a Qalo customer anyway. Like, I don't want that dude to be a part of what we're doing, because I think that they completely misunderstand what it is that we're ultimately about, right? Which is like celebrating that journey and recognizing the adventure that comes with getting married. And so that happened. And since you can look at like Google search volume and like, you look at rubber wedding ring, which is what he called it, and he didn't say Qalo. HBO cut him saying Qalo out of it. So if you look at the search volume for rubber wedding ring, nobody had ever searched for it before. And you look at that, it's almost like a 90-degree angle on that day of him saying it, because all of a sudden people were like, whoa, 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 what is this? Why is he wearing it? What is it? And that was like our proof of concept moment. And I think as an entrepreneur, not everybody, obviously we were so fortunate, not everybody would have that moment. But you look for moments, because there are moments that you're looking for small victories as an entrepreneur, because you don't get a lot of victories. But like, look for those moments to kind of pat yourself on the back or go, whoa, this is real, that give you that validation to kind of keep moving forward. And that for us was that moment of like, wow, this is real. And I remember going on Twitter from the time that the episode ended at 10 till like 5 in the morning, responding to everybody that were either making fun of him for wearing a rubber wedding ring, telling people it was Qalo, or just people that were saying positive things about it and telling people it was Qalo because no one knew what it was. So a lot of people think, oh, you have that moment and then you guys just skyrocketed, right? And it's like, no, we actually had to work our asses off. Like, just because you go on Shark Tank doesn't mean you don't need to show up to work on Monday and tell the world that you were on Shark Tank. Like, right, that kind of mentality where it's like, yeah, we had this great moment, but if you don't capitalize on that moment and you don't use that momentum to continue building your business, like, you're just going to continue to fall short. So that was a fun moment.
Yeah, for sure. And so you'd mentioned, so it started out in a garage in LA, and at some point you guys are headquartered here in Orange County. When did you guys do that?
So I moved, my wife and I didn't necessarily, I lived in LA for about 5 years. My wife and I didn't love Los Angeles. And so it was time for us to move back here. And so we launched the company on March 1st of 2013. So that was like the first day that the website went live. And in middle of 2013, my wife and I moved down to Orange County so we could focus on growing Qalo a little bit more and not necessarily have to pay rent. So we moved back in with my mom.
Gotcha.
So that was in the middle of 2013, and we actually commuted to Beverly Hills 5 days a week to still work in the restaurant. But we could at least not have to pay rent, and so we were able to save our money there. And then the rest of the time went to growing Qalo. And then in March of 2013, in December of 2013, we were doing $9,000 a month in revenue.
Wow.
And I went to Ted and said, somebody's got to go full time. Like, somebody's got to actually go completely after this thing. And Ted's more of the financial guy, where he's like, dude, we're doing $9,000. We're not doing 90. We're doing $9,000 a month. Like, what are we going to be able to pay you in order for you to go full time and quit your job? And so he was like, I just don't know if I feel good about it. And then I quit the restaurant and didn't tell him. And he was my manager at the restaurant, right? So it's like he wasn't there. And so I put my 2 weeks in with someone else. He later found out that I had quit the restaurant. I was like, dude, I'm doing it. I'm going for it. And so I think I initially got paid $2,000 a month for about the first year of Qalo. So that's what my wife lived on. So we moved in with my mom. I worked full-time Qalo. My wife and I made about $2,000 a month pre-tax and built Qalo. And so that was when it first kind of moved down to Orange County, was when my wife and I moved down here. And because, again, Ted had a kid at the time. He was a newlywed as well. He managed a restaurant. He had a successful career. So he had a lot more going on in his life. And so I was able to focus more on like the day-to-day tasks of the business. And he was able to focus more on sort of the long-term stuff, and then like more the financial and business side of things that didn't necessarily require, sort of like the boring tasks or the sort of the tedious tasks of, putting posts up on Facebook or shipping or things like that. So that's when the company moved down here. And then our first office was in May of 2014 was when we opened our first office in Orange, in the Orange Circle.
So funny story about that. You don't know this. So I got married in May of 2014.
Okay.
A couple months later, after my beautiful metal ring is trashed, Rachel, my wife, buys me a Qalo. Probably a few months after that, the silicone split. It started to get a split, and it basically opened up and broke in half. And so I'm like, oh, man, this sucks. Like, it broke. And so she reached out to you guys asking for a replacement.
Probably me. Yeah,
it was probably
me. Yeah.
So she said, hey, they're going to replace the ring. We just have to go by their office quote marks,
if you can call it that,
their office and pick a replacement. So on a I think it was a Saturday maybe or something. You guys gave us the address to that house in Orange. It was like a house, right? It was sort of like one of those residential.
It was like upstairs above like a restaurant. The Blue Frog Cafe was upstairs above that. It was like a 150 square foot room, sort of amongst a bunch of other things. Yes.
So we get this address and we drive over there and we walk into there and there's like 3 or 4 of you. There's nothing in it. And there's 3 or 4 of you putting the rings into the little pouches and then setting them in mounds.
So there's piles.
Just piles of rings on the floor. And we walk in and everyone turns and looks at Rachel and me. And Rachel says, we're the ones who emailed about the replacement ring. And like, oh, yeah. What size? 10? Okay. And someone scurries over to a pile of size 10s, grabs a little pouch out of the mound and comes back and hands it to us, and that was our replacement. And that's the one I have now. So
no
this is
way.
Still the one from 2014.
We had actually probably just cleaned up that process. We were probably actually really proud of that at the time.
So anyways, I thought that was a cool story from the early days.
Oh my gosh,
Qalo.
That's great. Yeah, you're definitely an OG, and we'll have to get you a new one. But because that thing's worn down. But it's cool. There actually is something sentimental about that, even to you personally. Yes, it's silicone, but there's actually a really cool story associated with it. And for us, we ended up getting about 12 people into that 200 square foot office.
Wow.
So it used to be where, and in the early days, it was my cell phone was the customer service line. Yeah, so I would wake up at 7 a.m. and it would, because of East Coast time, I'd wake up and I'd have 17 voicemails from customers. And so the first thing I would do when I get in the office is listen to all the voicemails from the East Coast customers and then call all of them back. Well, when we first hired, our first hire was in around May, June of 2014. And I would just hand in my cell phone and be like, dude, you got to call these people back. I can't do it anymore. I'm losing my mind. And nice, good people. And we wanted to kind of create that foundation from a customer service perspective. But we would reach out. And then once we brought more people into that office, customer service was still in there. And anytime someone would call, everybody in the room would have to be quiet because we'd have so many people in there. And so you would be calling customer service and talking to James, who was great, nicest dude. But literally there were 11 people that could have just touched James at that moment because we were all so close sitting to him. And we all had to be quiet to make it seem like a really professional environment taking customer service calls. But dude, we were playing mini hoop basketball in the background probably while it was going on.
That's funny, yeah. So it's always cool to see the way that when you see these brands that, which yours is, I think is kind of becoming an iconic brand.
Well, thank you.
Or at least it's definitely one that's disruptive and innovative.
Yeah.
To see the kind of the humble beginnings or how scrappy you had to be to make it work.
Oh, for sure. Super scrappy. I think it's kind of part of the journey, right? Part of the journey with anything. That it's good to look back and to be reminded of where you came from a lot of different ways, from a financial perspective, from a people perspective, from a purpose perspective, all of those things. It's good to be able to look back and start to see where ground zero is and see where you've come from so you never really lose sight of that.
So there's 2 questions. The first one has to do with competition. So obviously at some point, the wedding ring industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
About $13 billion, yeah.
$13 billion. And so at what point do people in that industry start getting upset that you guys are taking what they sell for hundreds and thousands of dollars for $20?
Yeah, I think we didn't really see. It's interesting because from a retail perspective, we're in a lot of jewelers. And it's a really interesting meeting to walk into, and hats off to Clark, my head of sales, who's had to walk in way more meetings than I have, across from a jeweler who's trying to move a $300, $400, $500 men's wedding band, and dudes are opting for the $20 one, right? And so I would say 2 things. One, I think that we fully recognize the value of that industry and what it's represented for so long, right? And so I think it's part of it for us. It's also working with that industry, right? And recognizing, what ultimately customers are looking for, because everything we do is to understand what customers are looking for and to better create the customer journey within Qalo. But for us, it's how can we maybe play alongside with jewelers? So how can we maybe collectively work as a team? So from a retail perspective, it's less about how can we come in and just decimate what you've created, and more about hey, how could we be a potential add-on to someone that wants to come in and still wants to wear a metal band? How can Qalo be kind of a cool insurance policy that goes along with that metal band that someone purchased? So how can we collectively work with the jewelry companies and with the collective jewelry industry to maybe help them come along with us, as opposed to trying to, again, decimate what it is that they've created over time. The second point there is adapt or die, man. I mean, I think we're seeing now in a world where it's like you have to come along and you have to adapt, or else like you're going to cease to exist. And the world moves so much faster than ever has been before. And so we've seen some jewelers that push back on Qalo and don't like it and are against it. And I would say to them, like, we're going to have an impact on your business. So you better either adapt and play along with us and come along, or like you're going to cease to exist because the world is changing and you better change with it. And then we have really awesome jewelry partners that are like, dude, we recognize what Qalo is. We love what you guys are representing. And we actually think you can help the entire collective industry as opposed to viewing us as a negative. And those are the jewelers that we want to work with. But there's no doubt, like when you talk about Qalo and you talk about disruption, we've been disruptive. And the way I look at it is we took something that honestly is like, for lack of a better term, like prehistoric. I mean, people have been wearing metal rings for thousands of years and just no one questioned it. And I think that true innovation and true evolution of product categories is when someone walks in and says like, yeah, sure, we've been doing this for however long, but is that the best way to be doing it, right? And so it's the same thing with like, I think it's Henry Ford that talks about like, if I would have listened to everybody, I would have just gotten faster horses as opposed to creating the car, right? And so it's like everybody had ridden horses for so long. Like, why create a car? Like, why not just get better horses? And it's like, no. Like, just because we've been doing it for so long or been doing it that way for so long doesn't necessarily mean it's the right way.
Yeah. My other question, so obviously the lifetime of a metal wedding band is decades. And so that's the high price point. So if you're looking at something that people generally only buy once, having a $20 price point, because now I'm starting to see people, they get multiple Qalos, they kind of accessorize and matte. I mean, so it's becoming now almost more of an accessory, right? So what did that look like? Because if I only buy one Qalo, if people only buy one Qalo, right, a $20 price point is not going to be.
We always got to find a lot more married people. Yeah. And fortunately, about 3 million people get married a year. So fortunately, you have new. But when you talk about trying to grow a business, you're right. Like, how do you get people to think differently about something they've thought the same way about for, again, hundreds of years?
And you guys obviously had to find a way to create repeat customers, right?
Yep. And so I think you're exactly right in saying that to me was maybe the most disruptive. Sure, a new material, and sure, people not buying metal anymore and buying silicone. Like, yeah, that was disruptive. But there was also a disruptive element in a positive way to our competition, which would be the jewelry industry, is that now all of a sudden men are viewing wedding rings as an accessory as opposed to something they have to wear and or put on as a result of a decision that they made, right? So for me, and I don't know if it was different for you, but like, I got married and my wife was like, what band do you want? And I'm like, that color's kind of cool. Like tungsten, sure, that sounds great. I don't want to spend too much money on it. Right? Like that one's fine for me. The process of purchasing a woman's engagement ring and or their wedding band for their wedding day and a men's wedding band is like, they're on opposite sides of the fence, right? They're completely different from one another. And so what Qalo said all of a sudden is like, why can that product not be a badge to represent the type of husband you want to be and the type of man that you want to be? And then the same goes for women, right? Like when we talk about, we actually started with men's wedding bands because we were men and we were solving a problem for ourselves. But when you look at women as well, like, sure, you have that really nice diamond, but like, what would it look like to also, the same way you wear a certain brand's t-shirt or a certain brand's pair of jeans or a certain brand's pair of shoes? It's because it's a representation of who you are. So why does a wedding ring not get to play in that exact same space? And I would challenge you to tell me one men's wedding ring company prior to finding out about Qalo, like a metal wedding band company. Like, I couldn't name one.
Yeah.
Right? You do it by materials, right? And so it's tungsten one, or that's a platinum one, or that's a gold one, or a silver one. Well, what we want to challenge is like the same way a pair of shoes can say like, this is who I am and this is the way I live my life. A wedding band can do that exact same thing. And what's even cooler about that is that it's connected to the most important commitment you've ever made in your entire life. And so for us, it was never necessarily about just like, oh, hey, here's this functional wedding ring. Sure, it was about that. But for us, it was about something way bigger that now all of a sudden, like, your wedding ring can say, I'm married and these are the things I care about. This is who I am as a person. This is the type of lifestyle that I lead. And so when you talk about people buying more than one, it was great. I want to accessorize with this, and I want to be able to have multiple of these. One, because I love what it stands for beyond just as a wedding ring. And two, like, this is a badge for me to say, like, this is the type of husband that I am, and type of man that I am, and then this is the type of wife that I am, and type of woman that I am, and these are the things I care about, and I can be a part of a community of other people that believe life should be done the same way. And then the challenge is on us as a brand to curate that way of life that people ultimately want to be a part of. So now when people see a new Qalo come out, they're like, dude, I got to get that because I love what this company stands for. And like, I want to be able to wear the newest, coolest thing. And then the challenge also on us beyond the brand is to continue to innovate and create really cool products that people want to wear. And so it's less about like, oh, this is me just buying another wedding band, and more being like, that's Qalo's newest thing, and I love the brand that they are and what they represent and what I can get behind. And I want to be able to purchase more of those. And then also, now that it's a badge, as opposed to here's just a silver ring I wear with everything, now that it's a badge, like I want to wear this color with this, or I want to wear, I'm someone who works with my hands, so I want to get Q2X, which is the best product on the market if you're somebody who works with your hands in automobiles or on fighter jets or whatever it is you may be in an oil rig. Like, I want to wear that because Qalo's thought about me in that way, and then also thought about my family and my relationship in that way too. So I think that's what's different about it, is that we've created a product that says more about you than just that I'm married, and so now people are excited to buy more.
That's cool. So when you said earlier at the beginning that you're a mission-driven company, that's the mission. Describe the mission in more concisely.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, I'm taking a drink of water. I think for us, and it's funny that in kind of the prep questions for this, which I'm glad you do because it gets my wheels spinning before I come on here. You asked sort of like, what are you currently working on? And the purpose of the company is actually something that I'm focused on right now. And so we always knew why we started was, hey, we want to be really proud. Really to be married. And we want it to be a really cool thing, not necessarily like there's the cliches of like, hey, the ball and chain, or hey, your life ended, dude. You know what I mean? Like, you're commiserating at your bachelor party as opposed to sort of excited about the new adventure that guy's about to take. And so that was kind of how we started. But now it's like, how do we really define that to be a purpose-driven company? And then like, what does that say about the charities that we work with, and then the branding that we put out and the messaging that we put out? And so it's not something that's been worked through, but I would say like Qalo's ultimately trying to redefine marriage. Right, to create a way of life that contributes to your legacy. So when you look at your role as a husband, or your role as a father even, or as a wife or a mother, like ultimately what you're doing through the two of you together and coming together is creating a legacy that exists beyond, whether it's just for you guys as a couple or whether it's down to your kids or passed on through generations. But what Qalo wants to do is like, we don't want marriage to be this kind of negative thing. And for us, we say like, if you've taken that vow and you've said like, we're making the decision today to commit to one another forever, we want to make sure that the forever's forever. And we want to help create a way of life beyond marriage that's like, this is the adventure. Like, this is like, what a cool journey. And then the two of you coming together ultimately is the best way of life. And the best way of you doing life is getting to do it with someone else, right? And so I think if you look back at like the greatest moments in your life, I would challenge you to tell me in how many of them you're alone. Because I don't think that when we look back at all of the greatest moments in life, oftentimes it's moments that are spent with others. And so we believe that day that you make that vow with one another, Qalo wants to come in and go, we believe that after that vow is made, this is the best way that life should be lived. And what we want to do as a brand is help to curate that way of life that you're stoked to be a part of, that's one of being healthy, right? So living a healthy lifestyle, that's one that's living outdoors, that's understanding that meeting at 8 p.m. is maybe not more important than tucking your kids into bed or being at home with your wife and talking through things. And so we just want to deepen the connections. We want to focus on the couple and make sure that the two of you, like regardless of who you are, that the two of you are caring for one another and understanding that the relationship you have with one another is building a foundation, whether that's for family, whether that's for getting a dog, whether it's for having a house together, whether it's for caring for people, just the two of you in the outside world. Like, we want to help create that and make it a really cool, awesome thing. And so to sum it all up, like, we kind of want to make marriage awesome. You know, we want it to be seen as the start of an adventure, not sort of the end of your life.
Fair enough. That's very cool. Tell me a little bit, obviously you're still in the thick of it with Qalo. You guys are, I'm assuming, still growing pretty rapidly.
Yep, still growing. Yeah, Ted and myself, the founders, are still very involved in the company.
So what is, to this point, so there's people who are listening to this that are either entrepreneurs, are business owners, want to be ones, but maybe are focusing in different industries, manufacturing, service business, B2C, B2B. If you were to think of something that you've learned up to this point through your experiences that kind of translates across industries, what would be one principle that you have for that?
Yeah, so I think there's a few. I mean, we've been through it all, from everything from finance to marketing differently to manufacturing differently to hiring differently. Um, I think there's the very tangible things like know where your cash is going, right? So like that's not exciting. And entrepreneurs, when they think about starting a business, they don't go like, man, I can't wait to look at my P&L, right? And make sure that I understand where my finances are going and making sure I'm understanding the return and everything that I'm putting out there. But I think in the early days of business, and then it lends itself all the way to where I'm at today, 5 to 6 years in, is that like understanding where your money's going, why it's going there, is just so helpful. And I'm not a financial background guy like that. I didn't look at it. Ted and I didn't even really have somebody in finance doing bookkeeping for us till like year 2 or 3, dude. We were just like shooting from the hip, swinging away. And it was like, that's not a great way of doing it. So I look back and I'm like, I think it's really valuable that in the early days, whether you have like VC money and you have money coming out your ears initially as an investment, or you're starting from your garage and you're emptying your savings account, like always pay attention to where your money's going and understanding the return that you're generating from it, because I think it's going to create a really good discipline that as you grow, like the money's going a lot more places and it's a lot more difficult to track. But as an entrepreneur, because most of us, I don't want to make a generalization here, but most of us aren't probably financially wired people, right? Like we're people that are very passion driven, that like are really kind of shooting from the hip and just trying to grow the crap out of something, that maybe don't look and go, oh shoot, like where did my money go and why did it go there, to really understand that. So I think that's just an initial discipline that you can really get ingrained in yourself in the early days to save you a lot of headaches later, because we've dealt with a lot of headaches of not having a lot of financial discipline, and we've paid for it, literally and figuratively. So there's that. I mean, I think as I go through a purpose journey myself and looking at my own organization, having a reason for doing what you're doing beyond just making money. And one of the questions you asked on here is like, I don't know if I'm jumping a gun, but I'll answer it now anyway, of like, what would you sort of look back and tell yourself? 5 years ago, or sort of in the early days when you started Qalo, and I would say like, your work is not going to leave you more fulfilled, right? And if you're searching for building this company to create fulfillment in yourself, like you're not going to find it unless like you're doing it with a very specific purpose in mind. So whether that's to the Tom's mentality, right? Like put shoes on kids in Africa, whether that's for us to try and help deepen the relationships of couples and even go as far to like reduce the divorce rate in America, right? Like those are purposes that are like, I'm waking up and I'm going to work for a much bigger cause than just trying to make more money, right? And again, there's nothing wrong with making money. You have to make money. It's important. But if that's the reason you're showing up to work every day and your company doesn't have a mission or a purpose that's bigger than that, you're going to get burnt out. And I would honestly say like customers now they smell bullshit from a mile away. They're more educated than ever before. They're smarter than ever before. So if you don't have a direct purpose behind what it is that you're doing, like it's really difficult to be authentic. And so make sure, like if you're somebody that's operating a company and you're listening to this going, oh, I don't really know what our purpose is or what our mission is or what we're really trying to accomplish beyond just making money, then I would challenge you to ask that question. And it can be evolving, but I think there should be a reason greater than just, making a lot of money, that you're showing up to work every day. And if there's not, I would challenge yourself to figure out what that is.
Switching to the muzzleload round, which is some shorter format questions.
Yep.
What have you accomplished in your business that you're most proud of?
So I would say that that's kind of twofold. One is sort of internal, one is external. So internally, I think building something from nothing is like, you got to look back and be really, really stoked on that. And not having any idea what I was doing. I'd never been to business school. I'd never taken a business class. I knew nothing about what I was doing as a college dropout. Like all of the things, like it seemed in a way that the world was kind of stacked against me. But looking back and going like, just having the persistence and the perseverance to continue working through and building something's really awesome. But the coolest part about it is the result that comes from that, which is getting to employ people. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, and the people are the hardest part of running a business. So it's like, there's two sides to that coin, but like getting to know that people are passionate enough about what Qalo stands for, that they are excited to show up to work every day. And then two, knowing that like we get to build something that provides for other people's families. Like their kiddos get to go to school and their wife maybe gets to stay at home, or their wife gets to pursue her passions and work in the job that she wants to work. Like whatever it may be, that like Qalo has given them an opportunity to do that. So I would sum it up in saying that like Qalo gives people an opportunity for them to pursue their own purpose in a way by financially providing for those families and those couples. And I think that's really cool as well. And then externally, I think building a community of people, that when I say like we have millions of people wearing Qalo, like it's because I think that they believe in what it is that we stand for, and getting to curate a community outside of the four walls of Qalo that we can be authentic to, that we can fulfill our purpose with, and that we can sort of like come alongside these relationships and try and help make people have a better connection with their spouses. Like that's rad. And so I think ultimately the impact that we get to make on people both internally and externally is what I'm most proud of.
What are you personally reading to, listening to, subscribe to help with growth and development?
Yeah, so I always say like I had kind of a Goodwill Hunting education, which is like when he talks about, I think it's like $2 in late charges at the public library or something, right? Like, so for me, it's all the self-education of like I am obsessed with learning. And there's a common theme amongst people that I've seen really to be really successful in this world, and it's the fact that they all read. And so I'm an avid reader. I'm obsessed with reading. I listen to podcasts obsessively. I try and find balance of like obsessively diving into like the business world, and then also just like listening to podcasts for fun. Like I listen to Dak Shepard's podcast, Armchair Expert, and it's like, dude, I love it. I absolutely love it. One, because I think he's a badass and he does a great job. But two, because I think it's really cool getting to see the other sides of people's lives. Where it's like, hey, you come on. It's like, great, you're really successful, but I actually don't care about that at all. Like, tell me about your life outside of this, or how you even got to this point. Like, that I think is really cool and valuable. So I listen to a ton of podcasts. Finding Mastery with Michael Gervais. I listen to Tim Ferriss' podcast a lot. And then I read a ton of books. So for me, I kind of have a system where I always have 3 books going. So I'm a little bit ADD. I'm sure you've been in sitting across from me. You can tell I'm a little bit fidgety. But I always have 3. I have a tough time sitting down and reading one book. I want to kind of switch around to others. So I always have 3 going. One is a faith-based or personal development book. One is a business book. And then one is like a fictional, fun, completely take my mind off of what's going on in my life book that I can just dive into. And so I always have those 3 going at once. And so I'll try and read all like 3 in a month. That's what I'll try and do. I'll try and at least finish one in each of those categories in a month. And the book that I actually just finished reading is A Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. Have you ever read it?
Yeah, great book.
Dude, mind-blowing, right? Like, and I'm always so interested as how, like, I think ultimately, whether it's in work, being a husband, being a dad, being a friend, being a whatever, like in sort of our search for fulfillment and purpose, like that's kind of what it all goes back to. And you learn that like your purpose and why you're doing what you're doing is the driver in everything that you do. Again, it's how you treat your spouse, how you treat your buddies, how you would treat your kids, and then like how you treat coworkers and how you lead. Like it all kind of stems from the same place. And so that book for me, one, learning about suffering, and finding purpose in the midst of suffering, I think is really important and a really valuable skill set, because the reality is that life is super raw and it's really difficult. And no one's going to go through life and not have some form of suffering. Hopefully, some less than others. But that was really interesting to me. And then I think his outlook on life after and what he learned from it, and his ability to say like hope for the future is a huge driver. And I think as entrepreneurs, that one resonated a ton with me, of saying like it was those who, and he uses a very specific example of like there was one person that was in the concentration camps. Sorry, Viktor Frankl, by the way, it's his story of sort of going through the concentration camps during World War II and his survival of that. But he talks about one very specific person that says, hey, I had a prophecy that on March 30th, I think it was, that we're going to be rescued, and that's when it's going to happen. And so he had kind of set his life and said like, hey, March 30th, that's his hope that kind of kept this prisoner moving forward. And Viktor Frankl documents and says like on March 30th, the guy died.
Oh my gosh.
And on March 29th, the night of March 29th, he started to see the guy get like physically more and more ill. And on March 30th, the guy ended up dying, and he recognizes that like if we set this date in our minds that something good is going to happen, or sort of this future date, it can create hope until then. But when that day comes and it hasn't happened, is sort of that element of losing hope. And he talks about how he always thought about what he would do when he got out of the camps. Mm-hmm. And it was thinking about his future and what could come from the future that could keep him going. And when you talk about entrepreneurship, dude, those are the days when it's like, don't say, oh, by July 1st, I need to do X amount of revenue. I need to go this far, because if you don't do it, you're going to view yourself as a failure, and you're not going to look back at all the wins you've had up to that point. And so I thought it was just a really cool lesson and a really solid lesson for entrepreneurs to say, like, that hope for the future and what could come, like, is what should ultimately keep you driving, because you're going to have really difficult days. And like the entrepreneurship journey, and not comping it to what he went through, but like it's suffering in itself. Right? Like, and it's very humbling, and your ego is going to take blows. But if you can constantly be looking to the future and see hope for the future of what could come and the purpose that could be created, dude, that's powerful stuff. And if you asked me 5 years ago, sitting in my garage, if Qalo would be where it's at today, I would have said absolutely not, but maybe I'll be done waiting tables. Mm-hmm. Right? But it was always that hope of what Qalo ultimately could be once I started seeing some wins along the way that really kept us going to this point. And now it's kind of a gut check of like, let's make sure that we're sticking with the purpose as to why we created in the first place.
What habits, routines do you have to stay on top of your game?
Yeah, so for me, it's interesting. I make myself hyper aware of the things I do that pull me away from discipline, if that makes sense. Okay. So it's less about like, I wake up at 7 every day and I read for 30 minutes when I first get up in the morning. Like, yes, I try and create those moments for myself, but like, I have a 1-year-old. I'm trying to be a good husband as well, probably falling short more often than not. I'm trying to give a crap about the people who work for my company, and then I'm also trying to lead a company, and I'm also trying to be a business partner. And so there's a lot of variables that get thrown at me that make it difficult to say, hey, at this time every single day, I'm going to do this. But there are things that I say, hey, I would love to write for 30 minutes every day. I would love to read for 30 minutes every day. And so then I start to be hyper aware of like, okay, I didn't read yesterday for 30 minutes, or I didn't write for 30 minutes yesterday. And instead of beating the crap out of myself, because there's nobody more self-deprecating than an entrepreneur, like you just beat the crap out of yourself all the time. I think it's just kind of how we're wired. I go, what maybe did I do that caused me to not stick with that discipline? Oh, hey, maybe I spent more time with my son. So maybe it's actually not about beating myself up over it. Maybe I made a decision in that day that was different. Or like, you know what, I actually sat and I watched TV with my wife, or I sat on Instagram for 20 minutes. Like, okay, that's something that I kind of need to be able to work on. And so, yes, that goes like, maybe it's a different way of answering the same question. But for me, I try and write every day. I try and force myself out of bed earlier than I want to. And there was a podcast that was with Tim Ferriss and a guy that was a Navy SEAL. I forget his name. And he asked him about discipline, and he was like, I get up at 4 every day. And or something like that. And
the Jocko Willink podcast?
Yes, you know what I'm talking about? When he's like, because I like to let my body know who's in charge. And I was like, yeah, you do, man. Like, that got me like fired up, you know? And so that guy's way more disciplined than I am. But what I like to do is I like to at least push myself at some point earlier in the day, so you kind of like build that foundation for your day that you stick on. So whether that's like waking up early, or it's like, hey, I'm going to eat a good breakfast today. You know what I mean? Whatever it is, like I try and create one discipline in the early morning that sets me moving forward. And then finally, I've learned that having a book in my hand is way more valuable than having my phone in my hand. And so I try and have that scenario happen as much as possible. And it's really difficult. Nothing more that's more of a gut punch than Apple all of a sudden deciding to tell you how much time you spend on social media with the new iPhone update, right? Like, it's like, oh my gosh, like I'm falling short in so many ways, and it's because of this. So thanks, Apple, for that. Good accountability, though, and I think that was eye-opening to me. That's like, sure, I'm trying to engage with people through social media, and I'm doing work, so there's kind of good that comes along with that. But how can I have a book in my hand more often than I can have my phone in my hand? Because I would love to sit here and tell you, we're like, no, when I have my phone in my hand, I'm reading the news, and I'm like really engaging, and I'm looking at blogs, and because I'm not, right? Like I'm doing other things on there. Like I need to have the discipline and the accountability for myself to be able to say that. So that's just a discipline that I have, where it's like I try and just read as much as possible, and I find myself I find life slows down a lot more when I don't have my phone in my hand. And for someone who moves at 100 miles an hour as often as I do, I find a lot of value in creating that time for myself.
People listening want to learn more, check out what you do. Where do you want to point people?
Yeah, so I think the best place is Qalo.com. That's where you can learn about my company and what it is that we do. you can email me directly if something on here resonated with you. I always love to engage with people. I get a bit over ambitious in terms of thinking how quickly I can respond to people. So give me some grace and being able to get back to people. But KC, just the 2 letters, KC at Qalo, QALO.com. Feel free to reach out to me and connect with me. I love helping other entrepreneurs. And if something on here resonated with you or you have a question or something, I'm happy to answer it in due time. And then at Qalo is our Instagram, so you can learn a little about our culture and our brand and what it is that we stand for and what we represent. I'm excited. You'll see a lot of stuff in the next 12 months come up about our purpose and why we exist and what we're trying to accomplish. Because I don't know if we've done a great job of that up to this point. There's that, and then there's me on Instagram, which is way too much of my son. I'll apologize in advance. But I try and also provide resources on there for people that can get inside my head a little bit in thinking the way I do and kind of my everyday. And I'm at Mr. Casey Holiday on Instagram if you want to find me there. But yeah, Qalo.com, check out the company. We're in a lot of retail stores, so if you're interested in seeing it for yourself in person, we're in Dick's Sporting Goods, REI, and among many other places. So
Cool. Well, thanks so much for taking the time today.
thanks for having me. I apologize. I talk a lot.